everyone, it's Nicole. I'm here today for Thermoweb for our design team up with the folks at Jillibean Soup. I love me some Jillibean soup. This was a really fun one for me. I've got a bunch of products here. I'm going to use two different kinds of Gina K craft dyes, as well as some gold Deco Foil. And I also have clear designer toner sheets. I have the polka dot version, really pretty. And just some white cardstock, and then lots of Jillibean soup pattern paper and some embellishments too. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm starting here with that designer toner sheet. I'm just going to trim a little bit and trim it in half, and then trim a little bit of the extra clear part on the end. And I've decided for sure I'm not sure what I'm doing with this layout so far, but I know for sure I want to put gold onto that toner sheet. So the trick with the toner sheet, it's already pre-printed, so you can go ahead and just run it through your laminator, and you're pretty much golden. You just need to pick your favorite Deco Foil color, and you can add color and foil in like minutes, right? So I'm going to trim down my photo while that's cooking, and I'm just going to go ahead and use my tape runner to add some adhesive to the back, and then get that on my cardstock, and then add some foam squares for some dimension to the back of the picture. So that came out, and because I actually put it the wrong side down into my parchment, I had to run it through again. There is two different sides to the toner sheet. You want to make sure that the printed side is the side you have face up, and that you put the foil up on the top of that. So don't make the mistake I did. So run it through and look at that. Voila! Pretty polka dots that are all pretty in gold. So now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and grab those square Gina K dies, and I have some scraps of Jillibean soup pattern paper, and I just want to cut a bunch of squares out. I'm going to use the purple tape. Love the purple tape. It's really great. My manual die cut machine is kind of old and rusty, as you can see. I'm fighting with it a bit because my plates are warped. But that purple tape holds the dies in place. You can see I'm fighting with it a little bit to get it started, but it really holds those dies in place, and so you don't have to worry that it's going to wiggle, it's going to move around a lot. So it's pretty handy. And one little piece you can reuse over and over. I think I used it at least 10 or 15 times to hold the dies down as I kind of went through cutting all the pattern paper. So I kind of repeated the same process with the squares. I just grabbed a whole bunch of three different papers, and I just cut a lot of squares, as you can see here. Now I'm going to use that purple tape again to cut the small leaves here from this little tiny bit of green pattern paper. And you can really see how, you just even can cover the whole design of the die, and it will hold it in place really well. And very simple to get it to run through your manual die cut machine. And like I said, it doesn't wiggle, so if you want to use a tiny scrap like that, it works really well. So now I'm trying to figure out what exactly I'm going to do with this page. At this point, I really truly hadn't thought too hard about how it was all going to turn out. I just knew what pieces I wanted to use. So I'm just going to create a bit of a simple grid here with the pattern paper from Jillibean and the various squares that I've already die cut, and just kind of move things around a little bit to fill in a bit of the background. So I like how that looks, so I'm going to stick those down just in place. I don't really measure or line any of that up. I just like to eyeball it. I find if you measure and you make a tiny mistake, it's a little more obvious than if you, just wing it kind of like this. Alright, so I have that in place. Now I'm trying to decide what I want to do with those designer toner sheets, because I really love the gold, and I thought about using it just on the white background, but I thought it looked really pretty layered over top of this gingham-like pattern paper, so I'm just going to cut it down to the same size square. I just opted to do that on my trimmer versus running it through the die, just for speed purposely. So I'm going to add those. You could definitely add those using a stapler or a tiny little glue dot somewhere where you wouldn't be able to see through the toner sheet, but I'm actually just going to take my sewing machine now and just run that really quickly through. I'm just going to hold that piece down into the place I want it and just run it through my sewing machine really quick. And it actually is a pretty good option to hold those toner sheets in place. It secures them really nicely, and it also adds a little bit of texture by sewing on the page. So I'll trim off my little loose ends here, and you can see they're nicely in there. I only sewed along the top edge of the toner sheet because I didn't want it to buckle. I didn't want to create like a bit of a bubble. Sometimes when sewing with paper that can happen. So now I'll add my photo, and I'm just going to clean up some gunk I had here, and then add a little bit more adhesive, and then start working on all the fun embellishments. So I previously die cut a whole bunch of these Gina K flowers from Jillibean cardstock, as well as some of these stems here from Jillibean pattern paper. And I'm just trying to create a couple clusters here on the page. So I'm going to do one on either side of the photo, and I'm going to use foam adhesive to kind of get those items on there and kind of pinch together those stems and the curve of those flowers just to get it all pretty on the page. And then I decided the stems were a little plain the way they were on their own, so I wanted to add a little more detail. So I grabbed the stamp that coordinates with the die set and some green ink, and I'm just going to go ahead and stamp that on there. And I'm not an expert stamper, so the first one I blew it, as you can see. So I'm just going to flip my board over. It stamps a lot nicer on the reverse than on the front, and you can see that I did a bit of a better job there. So I'm going to grab my other stamp that coordinates and stamp the reversed images here, and that adds a really nice detail. That's a really pretty stamp on top of the pattern paper. It's a really great look. Just going to clean that up and put those away, and then go back to the front of my layout. I also grabbed a cinnamon stamp off that same set. I'm going to stamp that in amongst my grid right away, but first I'm going to tuck this stem in there with some of that foam adhesive, and then I am going to stamp that sentiment. I believe it says, "Your heart blooms," I believe. You make my heart bloom. Sorry. I'm going to just stamp that there on that bottom right corner and work on my floral grouping. So I have a couple different larger flowers here and then some smaller ones I've die cut. They're both again from Gina K, and I have more of those stems that I've stamped. I'm trying to use the dud that I stamped and kind of cover it up with the flowers. So I'm trying to fiddle around a little bit with that. So I decided that I wasn't really loving how those flowers looked. I probably should have stamped the image over top of the flower on the cardstock, or the pattern paper, sorry. But instead I decided to grab one of the Jillibean Soup die cut pieces. And so I'm going to add that instead to my grouping. And that kind of just brings all the colors together from that one grouping. So I like how that turned out, but I'm also going to still use those stamped stems that I had and some of the smaller flowers instead that I've die cut, and I'm going to add that around my photo. So I'm going to use all of that, and I started with the larger cluster, and then I'm working my way down to the smaller little bits, and I'm using foam adhesive pretty much behind everything just to add a little bit of that dimension and texture. And then I thought I should add a little bit more pattern paper to each of pieces of the grid. So I just cut down a few more little tiny bits of pattern paper. I'm just going to kind of tuck those in amongst the grid there, and I'll end up sewing over top of that a little bit later. So using more of that 3D foam adhesive over top of the heart, or sorry, behind the heart and behind some of the flowers, again just to kind of pop things up and make it look a little more dimensional. And this is a really thick foam adhesive, which I like. It really stands up really well, and so when you put it in your scrapbook album, it holds up really well. It doesn't crush completely, but it still is flat enough that it will lay more flat in your album. So I'm just adding in some little bits of blue. I wanted to add another color to this layout, so I'm just tiny little bits of blue in around the flowers there, and just kind of adding these tiny little bits using glue dots, the Zots glue dots, to get those to stick. Same with those tiny little leaves that I die cut earlier. I'm just taking two of them together and pushing them right into the Zot, and then sticking it into the area that I want it to stick to. Very strong and holds up very well. And again, just tucking in some of those leaves in behind my grouping. And I'm going to try to tidy up my mess here. I have quite a bit of mess in the background, I'm sorry. But I really wanted to add more bloom, and I couldn't decide really how to get more blue, so I thought I'll grab the small flower stamp from the stamp set, and I'm going to just stamp a few times here throughout my layout just to get a tiny little bit more of that blue for a pop over top of the colors I'm already using. And then I had some of that foiled toner sheet left, so I thought I don't want to waste that. I mean, I could certainly save it for another project, but I decided instead I would grab a strip of green paper to get more of that green into the rest of the page, and I tore a couple strips off, and I'm going to do one strip on the bottom and one on the top of the green along the bottom, and then I'm going to just use that toner sheet that I've foiled, and I'm going to tuck that in behind, and I'm not going to add any adhesive, but I will sew it in place with my sewing machine like I did earlier on the toner sheets on the top of the page. So I'm just trimming it down randomly with my scissors, nothing too fancy here, and just tucking in the edges underneath the pattern paper. And then, like I said, I'll just quickly run this through my sewing machine. For me, this is the easiest way to stick that down. You could definitely, like I said, use staples. You could hand sew it in place, would be cool. Paper clips, glue dots, anything like that would really hold it in place. The Zots are really strong, so they would hold it down really, really well. Just going to trim off my sewing bits here and clean up a bit of my area. I'm going to add a little bit that flower with the Zot again. I took it off in order to sew, so I'm going to add that there. And then I thought about adding a different title to my page with these large letters here from Jillibean Soup, but I end up going an alternate route, which I'll show you in the close-ups. But I decided to add another little embellishment here, a die cut from Jillibean. And then I decided that I didn't have enough room for the large letters for a title, so I thought I need some more bling, I need some more foil. So I took the Deco Foil pen, and I'm just going to add a little bit of it, the glue, to the center of these flowers, just to bring a tiny little more touch of that pretty gold color. It goes really, really well with the coral and the yellow in this collection. And once it's dry and just slightly tacky is when I just rub it with my hand. There's no laminator required. You can just rub that in place, and it will stay nice and pretty and all pretty foiled for you. So here's how that looks all close up. I know my details are really pretty. I really love that stamped stem and all the little gold touches. My favorite, I think, is the Deco Foil transfer sheet. I love that gold polka dot over top of that gingham pattern paper. So simple and so easy and lots of fun. So I hope you've enjoyed this team up with Jillibean Soup, and we will see you again soon on the blog. Thank you. Bye-bye.